Pope Francis's recent remarks about the validity of other religions have caused quite a stir. And while his analogy of the religions as languages is very accurate, and I've made that same analogy here myself, it's important to use discernment to understand the context of what's being said and who is saying it. His remarks are very timely because, as many have noticed, the system is moving towards a syncretic parody of the perennial philosophy via interfaith dialogue and even joint worship, which, as the responses from those who hold to an exclusivist view demonstrate, in particular the sort of internet Orthodox Christian ortho bros or evangelical types who are always looking to be vindicated in their claims that Catholicism is evil, and also tradcats themselves. These types of people are pouncing upon Francis's remarks as proof of their claim that perennialism is the doctrine of Antichrist. They ignore the fact that the people like Francis who engage in this behavior have already compromised their own traditions as well, and therefore can only compromise others. Charles Upton put it well when he said, sure, the religions are all bridges, that's great, but Francis has already dynamited his own. The actual perennialist view, which is also the traditional Eastern view, is to be uncompromising on principles. And let me stop here and stress that principles may or may not overlap with theology. Just the same as morality may or may not overlap with theology. Those three areas are all related, but they're not the same. A difference in theology does not automatically equal a difference in morality, just as a difference in theology doesn't automatically equal a difference in principles. This is the crux of the sort of hard Western exclusivist mindset, that they view other theological views, even other Christian views, as not just wrong, but immoral. And so the perennialist view is to be uncompromising and rigid on principles while being open internally, not to being open or syncretic externally, which then compromises oneself internally as well, opening the internal space instead to pseudo-religions and the universal heresies like the climate religion or the rainbow flag and so on. Orthodoxy, by which I mean generic lowercase o orthodoxy as it applies to all spiritual practice, not just Orthodox Christianity, acts like a filter in this way. By being strict and constrictive in external practice, it opens up space for one to move around freely internally. And again, this is the traditional Eastern view, compared with which the exclusivist view is modern and especially Western. In the East, mixing of spiritual methods is frowned upon, but not because they believe only one method is true. Instead, it's the common sense that even if there isn't only one correct way of doing things, you still have to pick a way. We Westerners tend to engage in zero-sum dualistic thinking with everything. One need only look at our sports and our politics to see this in action. The relationship between the world religions is analogous to the longitudinal lines of the globe. They intersect at the top and the bottom, but there's a qualitative difference between north and south, even if they appear superficially to be the same. This is why the North and the North Star has had such an important symbolic role throughout history. For example, see the Hyperborean myth, and also why even to this day the so-called Global South is spoken of derisively in geopolitics, because symbolically it represents chaos. The syncretic one-world religion, now being brought forth by figures like Pope Francis, is the spiritual embodiment of this chaos, chaos mimicking unity. The bottom is an inversion, a reflection, a parody of the top. And because it's an inversion, the reflection apes what it's reflecting. They resemble each other, but one does the opposite of the other. If I raise my right hand in a mirror, my reflection raises his left. The opposite of me is not some random set of objects or a different person. The true opposite of me is, or negation of me, is me opposing me and doing the polar opposite of what I'm doing. This is the paradox. It's like the same thing flipped around 180 degrees. Think of it like this. The right hand has traditionally been associated with mercy and the left hand with justice or punishment. If I raise the hand of mercy in the mirror, my reflection raises the hand of justice. But without discernment, the two appear to be doing the same thing. This is why Christ warned us, not simply about evil, but in particular about deceptions. Watch out that no one deceives you. So at the top, there's true unity. At the bottom, there's a parody of unity. And in between, there is the appearance of multiplicity and division. The true unity at the top retains the spirit while allowing for the differences of the various letters below. The parody of unity at the bottom forfeits both the spirit and the letter of every tradition. And the apparent multiplicity between these two poles, which corresponds to the view of religious exclusivists, mistakes the tree for the forest, the letter for the spirit, the relative for the absolute, and the symbol for what it represents. From this middle perspective, there appears to be an irreconcilable contradiction between the longitudes. Everything comes down to point of view. Situated on one of these lines, believing that they have a complete view and focusing on the south or the chaos as evidence of their claim, but with their backs turned to the true unity of the north, they miss out on the fullness of reality. And if a person attempting to cling to this middle ground thinks that they can do so until the end of time, they're going to find themselves in an untenable position. Our world and our reality is in motion, and it's spinning, both on a physical and also a metaphysical level. As it reaches the end of its cycle, the spinning speeds up and it acts like a centrifuge, separating the heavy and dense and worldly minded from the light and ethereal and spiritually minded. And this middle ground disappears, just as the final judgment of all humanity is divided up into either the saved or the damned, with nobody in between. So let it be known that Francis does not represent what I would call the orthodox perennialist view. But with that said, even if he did, he's in error for another reason. Catholicism and Christianity generally is not Buddhism or Hinduism or one of the more metaphysically transparent Eastern traditions where there's no real line between the so-called exoteric and esoteric. In the Eastern traditions, there isn't a line because there isn't a need for one. As I said, generally speaking, in spiritual matters, the Eastern mind doesn't require another view to be wrong in order for its own to be right. The truth of its own view is not contingent upon the falsity of other views. This is not the case with the West, and traditionally there has been a distinction between exoteric and esoteric Christianity for this reason. Regardless of his holiness or lack of, as the head of the church, Francis should not be speaking in this way, because it can only cause confusion or worse. The proper response for a formal representative such as himself to these questions should be that while there may be partial truths in other religions, we believe that salvation comes through Christ alone. For those Christians who are more open and metaphysically minded, they can find the information they're looking for via other informal alternative sources, and I hope that this channel helps to serve that purpose.